we are told that we know a lot about human beings now because there's so many sciences that have examined human behavior, the way we act, the way we should act, the way that we shouldn't act, why people are the way they are. And of course we know these different sciences. There's psychology, sociology, anthropology, all different kinds of ologies. And so we are considered an educated people. And I had to study all this stuff, whether I wanted to or not, because I had to make the grade. And so, just to mention some of these things, it's a little complicated, but some of it may resonate a little bit. We have physical maturity. We have the process of, maturing physically. Being a baby, child, and adolescence, young adulthood, and then later adulthood, and so on and so forth. And then there's emotional maturity. An emotionally mature person, somewhat independent, not a complainer or a whiner, the kind of things where there's a sense of emotional maturity. You may even have been told at some time in your life, you're not emotionally mature. What does that mean? So emotional maturity. Then there's spiritual maturity. And that's what we primarily address as a people of faith, spiritual maturity. Now, one of these psychologists, it's called the hierarchy of needs by this guy named Maslow. I had to study him too, whether I didn't want to or not. And so we have psychological needs, safety and security, love and belonging, self-esteem. What do you think of yourself? What do others think of you? And then there's self-actualization. Now that's a biggie. That's a self-actualization. It means that you set goals in your life. You've got whatever it takes to get those goals. And then when you're a success, you have become self-actualized. We're all that way, right? I think we're all self-actualized at this point in our life. And so then there's spiritual growth and progression in the spiritual life, the salvation, being saved, coming to Christ, coming to know the Lord, reading the scriptures, following what is the way of Jesus. And so sometimes we have to go through a time of purgation. Have to be purged of those things that keep us from faith, that keep us from Christ. And for some people, that keeps them from church. Because there needs to be a purgation there. And then there's an illumination. Suddenly coming to conversion. Suddenly coming to know Christ. And that's a joyous thing. I've seen it happen. I'm very blessed to see that happen. And then there's unification. The unity of church, a community together, worshiping together, helping each other together. And feeling a union with Jesus, a union with Christ, is a magnificent experience. And the saints tell us about this in their stories. So rich and so beautiful. Because we have to have a sense of emotional survival. Our emotions can be very sensitive. We can be hurt very easily. And that's part of being human. Like if somebody ever said to you, you're no good. Well, why? What do you think that? So we have to have a sense of emotional survival in this world, day to day. And emotional security. I'm very secure in my emotions. I'm basically dependent on my own sense of myself in the world. That's a good thing. And then you have striving for success. Now, striving for success can be a very difficult thing. Striving for success in something or anything. And that comes to a decision. You have a career, you have a job, you have a vocation, you have this, you have that. And then having serenity. Can you remember a time when you were feeling perfectly serene, perfectly at peace? Now that's not all the time. But when you have that, that's a gift from God. That's a pure joy in the midst of this life. Now, it may be very rare. It's not something that happens every day. Then we have this, and this is where we get to the nitty-gritty. Jesus says this, "Amen, I say to you, whatever you do for one of the least brothers of mine, you did for me." That's a pretty powerful statement. Who's he talking about? Well, let me tell you a little story. It goes way, way back. Way, way back. I'm amazed that I remember this. I was young, in my teen years. And Friday night, we looked forward to Friday night because it was school and work. Friday night, we were free. Free, carefree. Now I remember one night, it was cold, bitter cold. We would go down to South Street in Philadelphia. Now, if any of you have ever been to Philadelphia, you should go to South Street. Now, South Street was a different thing in the 60s and the 70s as now, I'm sure. We'd all go down to South Street. Well, there were about 8 of us. We were known as the Eagle Roaders, 8 of us. And so we're heading down to South Street in Philadelphia. Bitter cold, okay? We had gotten a hold of some beverages. And so we were feeling pretty good as we headed towards South Street. Now, there's one thing about Philadelphia that I remember. We pretty much well accepted it. It was part of the landscape of Philly. There were the homeless people. Now, what they would do is they would camp out on the subway gratings because the heat from the subways would keep them warm in a freezing night. They pretty much ignored them, that's just the way they were. They were homeless. And they were on these gratings, just sort of camped out, and so we'd pass them by, and whatever. And so we're heading on down there, and then suddenly we came up to a synagogue, and there was a man laying on the steps, totally out. He's probably inebriated. So we were going to walk on, that's the way Philly was back then. You had those people, not much you could do for them, at least we thought. And then my friend Mark said, wait. We said, what? Wait, for what? Why? He said, gotta help that guy. We're all looking like, really? Gotta help that guy? What do you want us to do for him? Well, if he may freeze to death at night, it's so cold tonight. And we were like, well, we hope not. Okay? So we're like thinking, why does he all of a sudden want to help this guy, So he says, we got to do something. So we're waiting there, right? Sort of impatiently. And so he went to a payphone and he called the police. And he's saying, yeah, there's this guy, he's going to freeze. He's going to step to synagogue such and such near South Street and so on. He's going on and on. And so finally we're waiting for him to complete his call. He hung up, and he was kind of upset. He said, they're not going to do nothing. It was like the Philly cops, I probably see this all the time. They're not going to do nothing. And so anyway, we continued on and did what we usually did on South Street. The dancing, the music, the cruising. I don't know if you all know about cruising. It was a totally meaningless activity of driving your car in a big circle in the streets over and over again. It's kind of crazy. And so we had our good time, so to speak, But when we headed back, the guy was gone. So we were thinking that maybe the police did come and get this guy. Somebody came and got that guy. Now, if it wasn't for my friend Mark, that guy might have froze to death, really. Because that happens, in these big cities. People freeze to death. You never hear about it. Maybe on the news, so-and-so froze to death, I know in my neighborhood, there was a man going out to his car. He fell, slipped. Nobody knew that he fell. He froze to death. I'll never forget that. It's pretty tragic, But I'll never forget that. I'll never forget my friend Mark. He was a really, really good guy, you know. And I like to characterize it. That was before we were all saved, you're young, and stuff like that. So, but there was something in him that was biblical. There was something in him that was scriptural. Now, I didn't know whether it was religious, and I didn't know what church he went to. But I'll never forget that. And that's what that reminded me of. The readings here, Christ the King, reminded me of that. Now, there's a saint that said this, very profound. He said, charity is a good disposition of the soul, which makes it prefer the knowledge of God to everything else. Now that's beautiful. Amen.